I am Captain Reidar Smedsrud, and this is a South African story of whales and the men who hunted them. Behind me is the ruin of the world's largest land-based whaling station. The Union Whaling Company was based in Durban, on the southeastern coast of Africa. Its fleet operated within 150 miles radius of Durban, as well as undertaking annual expedition to the Antarctic waters. Although whaling started relatively late in Durban, 1908 in fact, the Union Whaling Company was the last of the whaling stations to operate in South Africa. When this factory on the bluff closed down in 1975, the chapter on commercial whaling in South Africa was finally closed. But let's go back in time to the beginning of this story. Whaling dates back to the 12th century Europe, where whales were hunted by the Basque in the Bay of Biscay. For centuries, whaling was carried out from rowing boats, as early hunting equipment was rudimentary. Only two kinds of whales were hunted, the rat and the sperm whale. These whales were known to be the slowest moving of all whales and were easier to catch from rowing boats. The valuable oil extracted from whales was used in early industry, and so hunting them was worth the close and very dangerous confrontation between the hunters and the hunted. You do remember the frightening classic Moby Dick. In the late 1600s, the Dutch East India Company in the Cape recognized the possibilities for whaling on the South African coastline. However, plans to establish a whaling station at False Bay never came to fruition. From the 17th century onwards, whaling was attempted with varying degrees of success off the South African shores. Knysna, Plettenberg Bay, Algoa Bay, Saldanha Bay, and the Natal coast were all places where whaling in some form or another took place. In the late 1800s, the harpoon gun was invented by Captain Sven Foyn in Norway. When these guns were fitted to steam-driven whaling vessels, the contest between man and beast became more even, and whaling began to be a prosperous industry. Within the first 4 years of whaling in Durban, no less than 6 companies were registered in Natal. By 1920, fluctuating fortunes in the industry resulted in only 2 of these companies enduring: Union Whaling and Premier Whaling. In 1925, a mobile factory ship and whalers steamed off on their maiden voyage to the Antarctica in order to commence offshore whaling, also known as pelagic whaling. This 6-month expedition were undertaken during the southern hemisphere summer season, and the large scale of these operations soon made the Antarctic the most profitable hunting ground. Then, in 1927, Union Whaling took over its rival Premier Whaling and became the only whaling company operating off the Natal coast. The Union Whaling Station on the Bluff had by this stage become the largest land-based whaling station in the world. The year 1961 proved to be the zenith for the whaling industry in Durban, where catches of 3,000 whales were recorded. This period also saw the expansion and modernization of the industry in Durban. The Union whaling buildings were extended to include many byproducts processing plants. Whaling fleets were then equipped with modern technological equipment, including ASTIC sets, which were sonar devices for the following whales while they were under the water and out of sight. ASTIC emits short pulses which reflects off the whales, and the movements of these huge mammals are accurately plotted. The whales can sense these pulses and it confuses them. Baleen whales react by running, usually swimming in a straight line, whereas the sperm whales react by diving. Whatever their response, they were carefully followed on the ASTIC plotter and had very little chance of escaping the vessel. Armed with this knowledge, and of course their explosive head harpoon gun, the contest between the hunter and the hunted became a very uneven one. Whales that were caught along the Natal coast were brought back to Durban harbour to this slipway. From here they were winched from the water onto specially designed rail trucks and taken approximately 2 kilometers to the factory. Here at the factory, they were winched off the trucks.
From the steam winches, a steel hawser went over a bollard on top of this concrete, and this was in line with the platform, and it was used to pull the whale off the train. After that, the winches were again used to strip the blubber off the whale after the flensers had made suitable incisions. After the blubber had been taken to one side, the next removal was the meat, taken off in huge steaks, 2 or 3 tons at a time. And they were taken over to the other side, where some of it was processed into meat extract and the rest of it into frozen meat, the fresher meat. Then after that, you only had the tail and the backbone, and that was taken to another little platform where you can see the remains of a steam-driven saw.
Yes, this was the site of a large steam-driven saw. As you can imagine, a large fin or blue whale could get up to 100 foot in length, so you can imagine the size of the bones. They would be easily 2 meters in diameter. And they'd bring the bones in here, and this saw had an action like this, and would cut the bones into smaller pieces so that they could be put down into the querner, which is here, which is in essence a huge pressure cooker. And there was a cage inside the pressure cooker, and as the bone was rendered down, the juices, the soup would go through these holes, and the fine material, the bone, the hard matter that remained would be dried, and the soup was spray dried for use as cattle feed.
And the whole whale was processed, providing a wide variety of products, such as oil, meat extract, meat meal, fresh meat for human and animal consumption, bone meal, cosmetic and pharmaceutical ingredients. It's interesting to note that the oil, which was the main product from whaling, eventually became a byproduct. Serious attempts were made at this stage to counter the considerable odor problem which the whaling station was posing for local residents.
I'm sure most people in those days would have remembered the infamous whaling smell, and We used to scrub the gases. We tried everything we could to eradicate the smell, but it was virtually impossible. We used to scrub the gases through a caustic soda foam solution, but it didn't really help. It was I had the unfortunate job of being the person that had to handle all these irate people phoning about the smell here, and quite often we would be blamed when the plant wasn't even operating.
The people who worked at the Union whaling factory, and especially those on board the whaling vessels, were mainly Norwegian, like me. The expertise of the Norwegian was the key to the success of the whaling industry, and many settled in South Africa. Well-known personalities like Arnt Carlsen, nicknamed Durban Carlsen, and the founder of Union Whaling, Abram Larsen, who had a ship named after him, added greatly to the Norwegian character of Durban whaling industry. The artist Nils Andersen depicted some of these whaling activities of his compatriots. Later, a large part of the workforce was made up of local people, such as migrant African laborers. At times, even Japanese quality controllers could be found at the Durban whaling station.
Well, when they started selling whale meat to the Japanese, they wanted their own Japanese people to be there to pack the meat and to look and make quite sure it was in the right quality. And these quarters over here were actually for the workmen. They had, I think, 6 to 8 of them living over here. The foreman, he lived in town, and so did the translator. So you see, this is where they lived, and they're quite a long way from the rest of the whaling station. And this is something I would like you to see, is their bathroom. Look, the original Japanese baths.
In 1954 and 1955, bad weather conditions, the increased running costs, and the reduced whale quotas instituted by the International Whaling Commission, better known as the IWC, adversely affected the viability of the whaling company's Antarctic expeditions. And so the Antarctic, the most profitable Union whaling hunting ground, had to be given up, and the company concentrated on the whaling operation along the Natal coast. In order to enhance the efficiency of its coastal whaling fleet, Union Whaling made use of light aircraft called spotter planes, which monitor the movements of whales from the air. Radios were used to transfer information from the spotter planes to the whale catchers, making the operation more effective. I had been a skipper and a gunner for several years on board catchers vessels, and when the company began using planes for spotting whales, I had the experience to know what to look for from the air. We hunted baleen and sperm whales mainly, and to find them, the spotter planes would leave at first light and fly for about 9 hours a day. When whales were spotted from the air, markers were dropped, and after locating the nearest catcher, both the distance and course to steer were given so that the catcher could take over the operation. As the whale population dwindled, their conservation became an important environmental concern. The IWC reduced quotas further, setting limits for each country of the various whales they were allowed to catch. The problem was that they were not able to exercise effective control. As a result, the whaling industry has and will continue to face extreme pressure from international conservationist groups. In 1967, the first serious decline in baleen whales was noticed during their migration past the Natal coast. And in the early 1970s, the Union Whaling Company experienced the worldwide economic pressure brought on by dramatic fuel oil price increases. This combined with pressure from international conservationist groups who called for bans on import of all whale products, marked the beginning of the end for the Union Whaling Company. Amidst all this strain and pressure to cut quotas even further, it was decided that whaling was no longer a viable business in Durban, and the whaling industry in South Africa was terminated at the end of 1975. So ended an era in Natal's maritime history, which for many was a time filled with controversy and confrontation. I must add that there are still those, like me, who look back on their association with the world's largest and South Africa's last land-based whaling station with very fond memories.
Well, I remember very well the statistics because I used to keep a diary of the number of whales caught each day, their length, all expressed in feet and inches, no metrication in those days, and the size of the blubber, and I used to estimate what the production should be, and hopefully that tallied with what we actually got, so I became quite an expert in prediction. I can just like to tell you that in 1965 we had never caught so many whales in any other year. In fact, it was over 3,800, of which I can remember 364 were fin whales, the balance sperm, and sei whales, Breede whales, and mink.
I look back at my Union whaling days as very fond memories. Nothing but sticks out in particular. I think for a young man it was one of the most exciting jobs you could have in Durban at the time, studying at Natal Tech. Certainly was always asked how you did whaling, how whaling was done, and I just look back on the whole thing. It's very sad to see it like it is today, but that's part of life.
Being here so many years, 15 years being here, being a whaler man, and to see this building in this state, sad, but then again it brought back memories.
I know my husband worked here, but for us it was part of the family, and especially the Saturday mornings we used to come here, that's myself and the children, and really we miss that very, very much. It's not quite the same without it.
Well, whaling had a certain romance about it, and it is very sad to see the buildings now in such a dilapidated state, because Union Whaling was a very wealthy company, and a lot of people on the stock market made a lot of money. So it is very sad to see it like this now.
I believe that sometime far in the future, possibly 100 years from now, whaling will return. There are two reasons for me saying this. Firstly, whales are an important source of protein which the world will need. And secondly, as the whale population increase, effective culling program will have to be introduced to keep a balance between the number of whales and the amount of food that they will need. By this time, of course, there will also be effective methods of monitoring catches to prevent the exploitation of these magnificent creatures.